What's up everybody, Steven here with Neural DSP. And today I want to run through the components and some of my favorite aspects of the new Archetype Abasi. The Archetype Abasi was made in partnership with Tosin Abasi, lead guitar player of the progressive metal trio Animals as Leaders. But I'm going to guess that most of you already know about Tosin Abasi, so I'm not going to waste any more time and I'm just going to jump right into this. So let's go ahead and take a look at the pedal section. The first pedal is the Logos, which is the compressor, which has your level, compression, and tone knobs. If you're familiar with any of the previous archetypes, they all have a compression pedal so that way they kind of smooth out the playing or increase sustain on particular notes. So these are the examples from the video that was posted previously this week. All of these were recorded on my Legator 8-string guitar. You can hear how when the compressor is engaged, it's smoothing out the signal so that way it feeds into the head more consistently. And then you have the tone knob, which will allow you to affect the EQ curve of your DI before it hits the rest of the signal path. And then if I want the signal to drive harder into either the distortion pedal or the head section, I have the level knob, which will allow me to boost the signal out of the compressor. And then we have the distortion or the overdrive pedal, which is called Pathos. This one has a tone stack, which is the bass, mid, and treble, which will allow you to affect specific points of the EQ curve on your DI signal before sending it along to the rest of the chain. This also has a volume and a gain knob, which is pretty self-explanatory. The cool thing about this pedal is that it has the voicing toggle. This will actually switch between two different voicings, edge and smooth. The edge is a little bit brighter and it has a little bit more crunchy gain, whereas the smooth is a little bit smoother tone and a little bit less bright. So you can hear how the edge voicing gives it a little bit more brightness, a little bit more clarity, whereas the smooth is a little bit less harsh of a gain structure, but also a little bit darker in presence. So let's go ahead and move on to the head section. So we have the clean, the rhythm, and the lead heads. Now let's take a look at the clean head first. On all of these heads, we have the low boost and the bright boost switches. These are in the preamp section, so this bass boost is in the tone stack, whereas the bright boost is in the volume pot. So you get a little bit different saturation whether you use the low boost or bright boost. So you can hear how different combinations of the switches will give you a different amount of saturation dependent on which one you go with. After that, on the clean head, we have the gain knob, we have the bass, mid, and treble tone stack. But the thing that I really like about this particular amp is the blend knob. So the blend knob mixes together the amp sound with a clean DI, which sounds sort of like a piezo pickup. And I actually really like this setting for lead guitar. It just gives it an interesting layer of texture over your lead because you can actually hear the string snapping and the pick gliding over the string, which is really kind of a cool element to this amp sim. So the cool thing about the blend knob is that the piezo sound actually goes and bypasses the EQ, and the impulse response section goes straight to the effects section. So this is important while you're dialing in your tone, so you know that your EQ moves and your impulse response moves are not going to be affecting that dry DI signal at all. After that, you have your master knob and your level knob. Now, if you've watched any of the other component videos that I've made on the Neural DSP plugins, you know how I treat the master volume control because it acts a lot like the analog equivalent. The more you push the master into the power amp section, the more saturation and warmth you get out of it. So essentially, I treat this like a tilt EQ. If I want a brighter sound, I'll back off of the master volume control and then compensate by boosting the output. And then if I want a warmer sound, I'll boost the master. Sometimes I even crank it up to full and then back off of the output to compensate for the volume differential. And then the cool thing about the level output on the heads is that if you have a preset in which you're using all 3 channels, you can volume match each one, so that way when you switch between the 3, it doesn't make a huge volume jump. Now let's go ahead and go with the rhythm head. As before, we have the low boost and the bright boost switches. We have our usual knobs, which include gain, bass, treble, presence, master, and level. However, on this head, we have what's called a tight knob. The tight knob affects the low end. The higher up you go on the tight knob, the more controlled your low end is going to be. However, if you want something a little bit more loose and a little bit more dynamic, you roll off of that tight knob. So for this example, it's a rhythm guitar played on the 8th string, and I'll boost and lower the tight knob so you can hear how much this affects the tone. And now let's go ahead and move on to the lead section. So we have our low boost, we have our high boost switches, we have our gain knob, we have our tone stack, master, and level knobs. On this one, we have an additional attack switch. This boosts and saturates the high end for an additional level of clarity and presence to your lead signal. So even though this is the lead head, I would still advise you to try making some rhythm tones out of this, because it does make some incredibly heavy tones. So now moving on to the EQ section, each head has its own independent 9-band graphic equalizer. And the cool thing is that each one is independent of each other, so if you have a preset where you're going between channels, your EQ will stay the same dependent on which channel you're using at the time. So let's go ahead and take a look at the impulse response section. We have our usual suspects, our dynamic 57, dynamic 421, condenser 414, and ribbon 121. And if you so choose, you can load your own custom impulse response into the plugin as well. And these impulse responses were captured by Adam Nolly Getgood, and there are about 70 impulse responses made directly by him. You also have these directional arrows to switch between your impulse responses. We have our position knob and our distance knob, so that way we can affect the tone of our impulse response. We have our phase flip and our on and off, so that way we can choose whether we want to have 1 or 2 impulse responses active at any point. Now let's go ahead and move on to our effects section. We have our time-based pedals, which is really interesting why they chose the name Chronos, because we have our delay and our reverb pedal. So we're going to start with the reverb off and the delay on and the mix at full, so you can hear exactly how this is affecting the tone. I'm also going to turn the ping pong delay off for a moment so we can hear exactly how this pitch modulation wheel is acting on the signal. Now this is with it at full. So it gives a really cool kind of chorusy sound to it, but you don't want to pump it up so much that it's actually throwing off the tuning of the song. So some of the other knobs we can run through are the tempo, time, low cut, high cut, feedback. We have our ping pong switch and our sync switch, which syncs the inner tempo to the DAW that you're using. And we also have the tap tempo if you wanted to dial in a specific tempo yourself. So let's start with our low cut and our high cut. These are high pass and low pass filters, which will allow you to accentuate or dip out specific frequency ranges, so that way you don't have any buildup in the overall signal of your guitar tone. Our time knob is going to adjust how fast or slow we're going to hear those initial feedback hits. So we're getting some chorusing sounds at 1/64th triplets because it's 23 milliseconds behind the original signal. Move up to 16th notes. Move up to quarter notes. As probably one of the mistakes that some people will probably make when they first get into this, if you make your delay time too long, your phrases are going to overlap, so your chords are actually not going to match up at certain points, which it did at the end of the phrase. I typically set it at quarter notes, and unless I'm looking for anything specific other than that, I usually just leave it at quarter notes. So let's go ahead and turn the delay off and move on to the reverb. Now we have the low pass filter, the high pass filter, we have decay, pre-delay, and the dry wet knob. In order to hear what the pre-delay knob is doing, I'm gonna leave the dry wet at 50%. Because the pre-delay is the first moment when you hear the reverberation. So you're essentially widening the gap between when you hear the initial signal and the reverberation off of the walls. So you can hear with the pre-delay at max, it's almost like giving yourself a different delay. So once again, we have the low pass and the high pass filters, which essentially just allow you to accentuate or filter out parts of the frequency spectrum that you don't want to build up, or maybe that you want to highlight. So like when dialing in the specific tone, I'm gonna put the high pass up so that way it filters out some of the low end. That way that buildup doesn't become a problem later on in the mix. And then to just go over some basic functions, we have the input knob, the gate, the mode, the oversampling, and the output knob. We also have the presets section where we can save our own presets. We can choose ones from the factory like Neural DSP or Tosin Abasi. You can choose my own, Nolly Get Goods, or we could just go straight to default. Now the input knob is obviously going to be how much signal you're feeding into the plugin direct from your track. The gate is going to filter out the noise and the noise floor, so that way when you set it, it's going to cut off whatever is going to the plugin so you don't have any hiss. Your mode is going to be whether the plugin accepts a stereo signal or a mono signal. This is particularly handy if you have two rhythm DIs panned left and right going to an aux channel where you have a singular version of the plugin affecting both signals independently. The oversampling switch affects how the plugin processes the signal. At high, it's processing processing the signal at a higher sample rate in order to get better quality and to avoid aliasing. And if you'd like, I can go into a video explaining that later on down the line. Now, oversampling can be a CPU hog, so if you're having trouble with delay or latency, you can go ahead and hit normal, and that's going to generally fix the problem. Now, the Archetype Abasi does have MIDI capabilities, and I'm going to get into that in a more in-depth video later on down the line. Thank you so much for checking out this video. Please like, share, and subscribe, and hit that bell icon for notifications on when we upload our videos. Links to the new Archetype Abasi are in the description down below. Comment down below as well, and let me know if you like this content, if you want to see more like it. And as always, I'll see you in the next video.